Hey, Shalom Akim, Shalom. All praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Bashim Yahushai, Bashim Makakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders, great millstone for teaching us his truth and citations to the sincere Akim and Akwath and to listen. May the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Brother Requai. I'm back in here with another quick and Lord's will as always, Yahweh Ratazal, Yahweh willing, an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I kind of wanted to do a little bit of read a story in regards to one of our former kings named King Saul, and this trait of bitterness, because sometimes, these sentiments, these feelings, sometimes they might come up, amongst maybe, your own situation or even amongst brethren, right? And it's just a spirit to, be mindful of and to rebuke, because it's not essentially a healthy, spirit to be in, essentially, right? And we saw the ruin of that, from King Saul, right? So I want to read a little bit of this chapter here, and as always, sincerely hoping that this lesson will be comforting, edifying, right, and you get something out of this, right? So I'll start here. So this is the book of 1 Samuel, chapter 18, verse 5. In the NLT, and it says, "Whatsoever Saul asked David to do, David did it successfully. So Saul made him a commander over the men of war, an appointment that was welcomed by the people and Saul's officers alike." It says, when the victorious Israelite army was returning home after David had killed the Philistine, referring to Goliath in the previous chapter, it says, women from all the towns of Israel came out to meet King Saul. So keep in mind, Saul is king at this point, right? He's still king, I should say. It says, they sang and danced for joy with tambourines and cymbals. This was their song. Saul has killed his thousands, David his tens of thousands. This made Saul very angry. "What's this?" he said. "They credit David with 10,000s and make me with only thousands. Next, they'll be making him their king." So, from that time on, Saul kept a jealous eye on David, right? So, Saul essentially, he hears these women singing, and essentially he starts to harbor these sentiments towards essentially his own kin, right? He's kind of like a son at this point, right? Because he ends up marrying, David ends up marrying his daughter, right? So Saul's kind of like a father in a sense, and it's very interesting too, because if you have a son that's like King David, and the things that David, he how he behaved himself, your son is essentially a reflection of you. But you see the way that the contrast in the way Saul conducted himself versus the way David conducted himself, right? The way the way King Saul conducted himself, even being a king, it wasn't a healthy example, right? And he started becoming a lot more earthly, a lot more natural, very carnal, and taking the opportunity to essentially enact vengeance and cause strife and envy, and there's a lot of bitterness in his heart and his mind towards his own kin, right? So let me get a quick precept. This is one of the consequences of sometimes we're in this flesh, right? But sometimes we try to we want to rebuke those thoughts, right? Because not all those thoughts are very pleasant, that we get them. This is the book. One second. One second. This is the book of Wisdom of Solomon 9, verse 15, and it says, "For the corruptible body presseth down the soul, and the earthly tabernacle weigheth on the mind that museth upon many things, right? So, one of the consequences of, in this flesh is that we get, these inward agitations, right? But these things are not, things we should, these are things to essentially, be mindful of, right? Because we don't want it to essentially become like a foothold in for Satan to get in and then cause further strife, envy, division amongst brethren, right? We understand that, okay, we're accursed, we have curses upon us, but we don't operate with a cursed mindset in the sense of, treating our own kin, this way, treating our own brethren this way, right? That's very, very earthly. That's not godly behavior, basically, right? That is the way essentially Jake has, towards that sentiment, that bitterness sentiment, that jealousy, that envy. Those different sentiments is what Jake has towards each other in the world, right? Like, for example, if like sometimes, you know, you can be somebody that has, maybe you might have a nice thing and the Lord might bless you with those some nice things, right? And then somebody in the world without that spiritual understanding, very carnal understanding, most of the time it's our own people. They have that, oh, look at him, he's trying to show off, I don't like him, right? And you just might be going about your business, basically kind of like what David was doing, right? You kind of just going about your business, and then somebody looks at you. You might have some nice apparel, you work hard for, the little things you have, right? You give grace, not grace, excuse me, but you give thanks to the Lord, for blessing you with something, right? And then Jake has that. They get into that nigga moment mindset, right? Where they, they're ready to, throw up hands and cause division, just over a little bit of jealousy, over, something that you might have and they don't have, right? So essentially, in this situation, King Saul is not receiving that amount of praise, you know, that David was getting. But if King Saul was spiritual, he would still understand, like, yo, I'm still king. The Lord anointed me. I'm still king. You know what I'm saying, right? But he let that bitterness, that root of bitterness, kind of get like a foothold, and Satan has a foothold in his mind, and it keeps essentially. It's not, instead of rebuking it, he kind of lets it, like, it kind of starts to fester more and more to the point where he's trying to essentially delete King David. Well, he wasn't king at the time, but you know what I'm saying. He tries to delete David, right? um, okay, let me go back to the story. Where was I? Okay, I'll just read verse 10 again, and it says, 1 Samuel 18, and it says, the very next day a tormenting spirit of the Most High overwhelmed Saul, and began to rave in his house like a madman. So you see the detrimental effects of what happens, right? And King Saul he's not even keeping in mind as well. You're both still of a royal bloodline. That's another thing also. You're still of a precious, kin. The Lord set us above these other nations. We're not like these other nations. Therefore, we can't conduct ourselves as these other nations, and that's something that Jake doesn't understand even to this day. So let's continue on. It says, David was playing the harp as he did each day, but Saul had a spear in his hand, and he suddenly hurled it at David and pinned him to the wall. Sorry, intending to pin him to the wall, but David escaped him twice. It says in the KJV that Saul cast a javelin, for he said, I will smite David, even to the wall with it. But David avoided out of the presence of his presence twice. Back in the NLT, it says, verse 12, Saul was very afraid of David, for the Lord Yahweh Bashai was with David, and turned away from Saul. So you start to see the carnal fruits that that Saul is starting to reap. He's not reaping good fruit. He starts to start reaping all these different carnal fruits, right? To especially towards your own kin. And sometimes, you know, you know, being in a situation like that, we have sometimes these same sentiments too. We get a little. Sometimes we get, some sentiment of bitterness, towards, maybe our situation, or maybe our own brethren, right? And sometimes in those situations it's so important to like remain spiritual, because sometimes, you know like for example, you know um, you can be in a situation, and it might be a situation for you to exemplify some godly, some fruits of the spirit, basically. Saul not capitalizing on this opportunity, essentially he kind of lost out on the opportunity to exemplify godly spiritual traits, right? Like it describes in Galatians, the fifth chapter, right? Instead of you know taking the opportunity to kind of like encourage him, exhort him, and so on and so forth for his valiance and his courage towards Goliath. He took it upon himself, and he let these women's words kind of get into his mind and fester to the point where he's starting to physically attack David, right? Instead of actually, like the scriptures say, a little leaven leavened the whole lump, basically. So this is what's happening. Um, okay, let me go back to, where was I? Okay, I'll read verse 12, and it says, Saul was afraid of David, for the Lord Yahweh was with David and turned away from Saul. Finally, as a matter of fact, before I continue, let me go to, I believe it's James. One second. Okay, this is James 3 and 14 in the NLT, and it says, But if you are bitterly jealous, and there is selfish ambition in your heart, don't cover up the truth with boasting or lying. In the KJV it says, "But if you have bitter envying and strife in your hearts, glory not and lie not against the truth. For this wisdom descendeth not from above, but is earthly, sensual, and devilish. For where envying and strife is, there is confusion in every evil work." Right. So in the NLT, it says, "For jealousy and selfishness is not of the Most High, but of wisdom. Such things are earthly, unspiritual, and demonic." Right. So these things are not of the Most High. These things are contrary. These things are earthly. That's the ways of this world, right? We're not of this world, right? These are the ways this is the way how people in the world behave, especially our people. And Esau and Esau is another one, is a person, that behaves because he's a natural man, basically. And because Jake were the Lord's woman, Jake is seduced into those ways, not just the philosophies, but also in those manners of, you know, behaving. They don't behave and emulate Yahweh Bashem Yahushai. They emulate Esau, right, and his ways and his culture. That dog eat dog. Not caring about your own brethren. Not trying to encourage one another. That Jake doesn't have a strong rich, sentiment towards, caring for their own people. Like when you go into like the ghettos and the neighborhoods, Jake has the mindset of essentially being a terror towards their own people, right? um, let me go to. Okay, let me go back to the story because I think there's a little bit more. First Samuel. 1 second. Okay, this is First Samuel 18 and 13, and it says, finally Saul sent him away and appointed him commander over 1,000 men, and David faithfully led his troops into battle. David continued to succeed in everything that he did, for the Lord was with him. When Saul recognized this, he became even more afraid of him. But Israel and Judah loved David because he was successful in leading his troops to battle, right? So essentially David, became very prosperous, but Saul became essentially he became and started to wax worse and worse because he was festering in that earthly wisdom, that devilish wisdom that is not actually yielding fruit of righteousness, right? Because if you really think of it, it's some in a sense, Saul is kind of like you know you know that praise is not essentially going to him as like he's a king, right? So people would think, okay, the king is the one that deserves all the praise, but you have one of your younger men, who's not king, receiving praise, right? So that's something he kind of had to bear. It's kind of like a little of a, it's kind of like a small version of chastisement, right? And instead of actually using that opportunity to yield that peaceable fruit of righteousness, like the scriptures say, he didn't like check it and wasn't spiritual, so it started yielding essential fruit of wickedness, of devilish behavior, basically, right? And it's the same thing that can happen to us too. You don't want to, you know, miss out on some spiritual fruits to capitalize on, right? Just because that sentiment is there, right? Because we can be, we get chastised too, obviously, but there's always, peaceable fruit of righteousness to be exercised thereby, right? So, I think I'll close off. One second. But this, where was I? Okay, this is Second Peter's chapter 1, verse 5, and it says, um, and besides all this, giving all diligence, add to your faith virtue, and virtue knowledge, and knowledge temperance, and temperance patience, and to patience godliness, and to godliness brotherly kindness, and to brotherly kindness charity. For if these things be in you, and abound, they make you that ye shall neither be barren nor unfruitful in the knowledge of the Lord Yahushua Hamashiach. Right. So these are things that can, make us fruitful, because when you think about it, these things, the Lord can remember us for particular things. I'm talking about good deeds, good fruits being yielded, right? Not corrupt fruits like envy and strife and bitterness and stuff like that. Like, yes, we go through those moments, but coming back to centerfold, to remember those things, remember being spiritual also, right? So anyways, that's pretty much it. I kind of wanted to touch on that a little bit. I thought it was a very interesting account I wanted to touch on, because I'm being honest, I'm guilty of that also, but you know understanding that there was spiritual fruit of righteousness to be gained in particular situations, right? So I'll leave it there, but Yaharatazah, that this lesson was edifying. Just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashim Yahushai, Ba'ashim Makakwadash, double honors to the apostles and elders, great most known of teachers is truth. Till next time, I say Shalom.